everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, good. Thank you. Sorry. Thank you, Dylan. That's a heavy talk to follow with this. So just get right into it. So we've all been there, right? It's been a long day. We're exhausted. We just want to get home. But sadly, we just missed our bus or our train, and there's not a while to the next one. Well, we can wait. We can sit. We can read. We can. Oh wait, no, we can't. Or maybe we're waiting for a friend or a loved one. You're not 100% sure where they're getting in, but we'll just wait. Maybe we'll grab a cup of coffee, and oh, there's no coffee, and oh boy, this is not a place you'd want to wait anyway. Or maybe we've met up with them and we were having a great conversation. It's time to go, but they decide, oh, I'm going to take the next train. I'm going to take the next bus. We'll just hang out for a bit and have another conversation. And you go to sit down, and oh, you get the idea. On their own, none of these are that bad. They're just little annoyances, but they are symptoms of a larger problem. Something that not only makes transit much less appealing than it could be, but also makes cities less friendly and less functional places. Somehow, failings like this make our urban public realm into something less than the sum of its parts. This is particularly sad, as public transit and public space should go hand in hand. They support one another. They make each other better. And more than that, when combined, they create cities that are not only more enjoyable, but which can add more for more, which can do more for more people. Sadly, all too often, however, the public space implications of transportation are ignored or forgotten, denying our cities and their denizens the vital spaces that they need and deserve. But before I go too much further, let me introduce myself. My name is Blair Lorenzo. I'm a professional urbanist and writer. I know that in many circles, urbanist is a term loosely these days, but to me, the meaning is clear. I'm an urbanist because I've dedicated my life to the study of cities, understanding what makes them work, and understanding how to improve them. My passion in particular lies at the crossroads of the ontology of urbanity, public space, and the importance of transportation to the shape and function of cities. Working in urban criticism like I do gives you something of a unique vantage point. You can study the results of complete projects on the ground and take a holistic view of how urban systems and urban places come together. This is something notoriously hard to do when you're stuck within the silo of any single field. It also allows you to see the seams that emerge when our public realm doesn't live up to its promises or to its potential. So let's start with some fundamentals, and in particular, why public space is so important for cities. I think the famed urban sociologist Lyn Lofland put it best when she declared that the public realm is the quintessential social territory of the city. Put simply, cities, especially urban cities, are in large part defined by the prominence of their public realm. It's what makes them unique. Unlike other modes of living, where people spend most of their time in private or semi-public spaces, urbanites spend a significant amount of their time in the public realm. As a result, the quality of our public realm has a large impact not only on how our cities feel to live in, but in how well they function. Fundamentally, cities aren't just a collection of spaces, but they're all the connecting fabric that lies in between. Of course, few things shape a city's public realm more than its transportation system. Transportation shapes a city's geography, physically. For instance, what businesses locate where, what is accessible, and how easily is it accessible, and who is it accessible to. But it also affects psychological geography. It shapes how we understand the spaces that we inhabit. I'm sure many people here today collect transit maps. It's certainly a transit nerd thing to do, but it's also a wider hobby. These diagrams come to be a symbolic definition of the city they represent. In fact, although transit stations are usually named after neighborhoods, they can have such an impact that neighborhoods sometimes become known by the names of their stations. What's more, transportation facilities often lie at the experiential heart of everyday urban life. They are the fundamental scaffolding upon which millions of people build their everyday life. They are the physical nodes that connect the human-scaled parts of a vast city. What's more, they're simply a place that urbanites must, for better or worse, spend a significant amount of time in their public realm. It's easiest to see this importance in the most prominent centers of urban networks. By its nature, transit concentrates people in both space and time. And this is especially true at transportation nodes, places where people change from one mode of transit to another, whether from bus to train or just to walking. These are spaces that people must inhabit, often on a daily basis. And that gives them transportation nodes a powerful, almost unique potential to become intense, important urban places. After all, they already have the most important ingredient of public space, people, different types of people doing different things at different times of the day. As such, they often become more important than just a transit space alone. Let's look at one of the great examples of a transit facility that's become a public space, and one that's close to my heart, New York's Grand Central Terminal. Before the pandemic, well over 300,000 people a day rode trains into or out of Grand Central Terminal. But that number actually lowballs it because it was estimated that between 750,000 to 1 million people pass through the terminal every day, making it a part of their lives. Functionally, it's the hub of Metro North Railroad, depositing suburban commuters in the heart of Midtown Manhattan. But it's also more. There are plenty of stations with high ridership that are only transitory, places that people don't particularly want to pass through, they just have to. Grand Central is special because it is a perfect example of a busy transportation hub leveraged to create a vibrant, multi-use public space. Many people look at Grand Central and say, yes, its most important part must be its main concourse. After all, it's gorgeous and it's what everyone thinks of. And make no mistake, for a busy place like this, a large transient space is important. It handles large flows of people. It allows people to orient themselves, to see their destinations, to head right for them. What's more, it acts as a kind of transitional space. It's a place to pause, to get your bearings, to clear your mind. It's also a natural place to wait for someone, to start a conversation, to finish it, to meet a friend, to part ways with a loved one. It's so natural, in fact, that you rarely plan these social interactions. They just happen in this space. So make no mistake, the hall is important. But if a grand hall is all you come away with, you've missed what actually makes the station work. The real magic, in my opinion at least, is in the lower level. It might seem surprising at first. Ostensibly, this is just a food court where you can buy food from vendors and go sit at a table. Of course, already this kind of strengthens the terminal's social aspect. Eating is obviously a very social activity. Also, however, the space is also just a waiting area. People will come and sit and wait for their train. And this combination is what makes it such a special, unique place. All of a sudden now, it's somewhere people can simply exist in the public realm without the need to outwardly project a purpose for why they're there. Sure, there are shops and restaurants, but there's no overt pressure to buy. And sure, there are trains and transit options, but because of everything else, there is no pressure to be traveling. By intermingling many different types of users and many different types of uses, Grand Central can become a space that invites in all for any purpose, including just existing in the public realm. It becomes a non-commercial, non-specialized third space, a place that is neither home nor work, where urban life can take place. As such, it's not only just a transit node, and it's not even just a social node, but it's a true urban node. And it becomes not just a space that people have to be, but a place that they want to spend time. Grand Central is not alone in this, of course. Indeed, the renovation of Grand Central learned a lot from Washington, D.C.'s Union Station. Many Grand Railroad termini, especially those that have been redone along a similar line, serve similar features. Other spaces too, like airports, have a very similar setup. Now, airports are obviously different. They're securitized, they're for travelers only, and they're kind of questionably part of the public realm. But as an example of what is possible in space when we let it happen, good airports are often a great example. What makes Grand Central so interesting is that Grand Central was not always the Grand Central we know today. It began as a private place for a private railroad. It was closer to an airport. You were here to take a train and go somewhere. And of course, by the 1970s, during America's long urban crisis of white flight and everything else, the terminal became a home to a very large visible population of homeless people, which was declared to be a terrible problem. And famously, Mayor Ed Koch uh, fought hard to say that the terminal was for transportation only, that anyone hanging out was guilty of vagrancy or loitering. And it was the beginning of this cycle of exclusion that if you try to get rid of undesirable people by making the space unpleasant to them or making it illegal for them to be there, well, you're just making the space unpleasant. And at the end of the day, if it's an unpleasant space, the only people who are going to be there are the people who have nowhere else to be. Indeed, it was only the late 90s renovation by Bayer Blinder Bell that fixed what and made the Grand Central we know today. They set out to leverage the space to create a diverse, interesting place, attractive to both travelers and many others. They decided that they were going to have shops, for instance, but the shops weren't just a mall. They would be curated to be useful to travelers, to others, and to serve a wide swath of people. It were curated to create an urban space. Now, of course, not every transit space is going to be Grand Central, and that's okay. Most agencies don't have a building like this. We're just scaled to operate like this, and that's fine. But there are still plenty of important lessons about stewardship of the public realm that apply to all sorts of transportation spaces. This is a 68th Street Hunter College Station on the 6 train in New York. I'm always kind of surprised by it. This is not a costly intervention. This is just a mezzanine above the tracks where some seats were installed. And you wouldn't think it would be much use. Trains come every few minutes. There's not much reason to be waiting here. And yet it always has people in it doing many things. This is a testament to the power of these public spaces, that people will find uses for them. It's also just a testament to how few of them there are out there. So what does this mean for those of us in the transportation world? Well, let's start with something that it's easy for even transportation professionals to forget. Transportation spaces are spaces. Transportation network is not just a collection of bus stops and trains and vehicles. It is a collection of physical public places that people spend time in. And as such, they become deeply important parts of urban life. They are a vitally important part of the public realm. As such, there's a lot we can do to help ensure better functioning, more urban cities. Of course, I don't have time today to go into everything that makes for a successful public space. I think going through some fundamentals is good. Things like seating is important, not just for accessibility. There are plenty of people, after all, who need to sit for very many reasons. But even with high frequency service, there will always be times people have to wait. Seating is even more though, too. If you have a busy enough station, maybe you should have different types of seating, benches, tables, things like that. What I call safety through people, as Jane Jacobs famously said, feelings of safety in urban environments come from eyes on the street. And most busy transportation places have this in spades. This is something we can achieve through, we normally look at vending and retail, for instance, only in terms of the amount of money it can bring in. But vending and retailing and the like can also just keep extra eyes on the space, keep it populated, and make it more interesting. Of course, if we're going to talk about safety, we also have to talk about making sure we are being equitably safe. We need to find ways to ensure that everyone can be in the space. We can't rely on exclusion. And it's not just about exclusion, it's about being welcoming. When we choose amenities, when we we define the behavior of our security, all these things, we're deciding who the space is for. And we have to cast that net as broadly as possible. Obviously, There are things like facilities like restrooms. Public space needs to take care of human needs. And to that end, human needs like amenities will serve them really well. That's sometimes retail, but even vending machines can add a lot to a public space. This all seems straightforward enough, but it's surprisingly easy to lose sight of when you're stuck in the minutia of running a transportation system. Managers and employees are trying to solve problems, important, difficult problems. It can be easy to overlook the deep public responsibility that becomes with providing such a fundamental public service. This is especially true because we have so few systems in place to either encourage or support public space, not just within the transit field, but anywhere. When people do try to make public spaces in transit, and they often make some common mistakes. Sometimes, like we talked about with Grand Central, they say, oh, it's the hall that's most important. And we end up with something like the new Moynihan Train Hall in New York. I apologize, most of my examples are from New York. Just close at hand. Without seats, without anything else, is this a worthwhile investment? It's a hard question. Sometimes the decision goes the other way, like what the Port Authority did at the World Trade Center Transportation Hub. They leased out the space as a mall to Brookfield, and that makes it just a mall. It barely feels like a public space at all, and that certainly doesn't function as one. Most fundamentally, however, most places are nothing at all. Most things labeled transit centers are often garages on the edges of town where there may be a bench or two, but buses come through. And these intermodal transit centers are such an important part of transit networks, and it's such a wasted opportunity for public space and for the life of the city to not have to not leverage their use as public space. That said, I can talk about public space and public responsibility till I'm blue in the face, but the sad reality is that not only do many transit operators fail to treat the wider public with respect, they don't even treat their primary constituency, riders, with respect. Again and again, in order to deal with the problem of homeless people or undesirables, transit agencies remove seats, making their systems that much less accessible, that much less friendly. And starting that cycle of exclusion that often comes with hostile design. All too often, restrooms are closed. They cost money to maintain. And it's not just hostile design. Agencies, this may not seem related, but I think it is. Agencies will sometimes, for a few extra dollars, wrap their entire transit vehicles in ads. This not only makes for a worse passenger experience, try to see out of one of these buses at night, but it sells out something that the corporate world really recognizes is incredibly valuable: your brand, your public image. We see this and we wonder why people lack pride in their public institutions. The apotheosis of this, however, has to be when New York's MTA tried to remove trash cans from the subway system. I mean, after all, they were a security risk. They cost money. And studies showed that most people weren't going to litter. They would take their trash with them and get rid of it somewhere else. But you have to ask the fundamental question: what are we doing here? You're missing the point of being a public service and creating a part of the public realm. We should be creating people spaces want to be in, not that they just barely tolerate being in. At the same time, I try not to be naive. There are real systemic issues here. We already discussed how easy it is to lose sight of these things in the face of important, but to the average rider, parochial issues. Obviously, lack of funding is also a significant issue. Transit is sadly always fighting for its life in this country. And one of the reasons airports are such an exception to this rule is that they can rely on ticket and concession money, something that an already subsidized service can't do. This is a big problem. And there's also a lack of expertise within agencies and around. You could solve that by hiring people like me, but there's plenty of people you can turn to, people like New York's Project for Public Spaces and the like. There are also other things that are less defensible. Sometimes there's just a lack of interest or understanding. People are happy to operate in their silos, and they don't want to reach out to others and complicate their projects with more things that they do not feel as part of their job. There's always the fear of undesirables, sending things into a hostile design spiral. And as I said, If you make a space that is very uncomfortable to be in, the only people who will ever be there are people who have nowhere else to go. And finally, for lack of a better word, laziness. It's easy to follow the path of least resistance, to shun extra responsibilities. Interacting with other agencies like parks departments or public space uh, is work, and it makes more planning than you have to, and it gives you more responsibility than you have to. It's difficult, but to fall prey to that is to lose sight of serving the broader public good. Some of these problems are easier to solve than others, but they are all solvable, and they are important to solve. Before I leave, I want to ultimately press upon you two things to remember. Remember when the infrastructure bill passed over the summer, the joke was that everything was infrastructure. Well, I'm dead serious when I say that public space is the infrastructure for public life. As I said at the beginning, the public realm is what defines the city. It's what makes it unique. Whenever we build infrastructure, we're not only connecting places or providing services, we're fundamentally shaping how our cities work, often in ways we never anticipated. We are building the scaffolding upon which people build their daily lives. We must not only plan for emergent behavior, but we must allow it to happen. We need to be good stewards of the public realm to build the types of cities in which we want to live. Finally, something never to forget. Cities are complex. They may be the single most complex things humans have ever built. As such, no one person, no one field can understand them in their entirety. And as such, those of us who work with cities in any respect cannot afford to be siloed. We have to go outside our realms. We have to collaborate with others and other realms and other fields. This probably means collaboration. And this almost certainly means sharing authority. And it definitely means sharing both costs and responsibility. Ultimately, though, we must be humble. We must understand the importance of what we do when we work with cities. We must recognize that people will use the spaces we create in all sorts of ways, and that can be a wonderful thing. We need to take our responsibilities seriously because public spaces are vital to the city, and to build the ones that they and their residents need and deserve, well, that's going to fall on us. Thanks, and I can take some questions if there are any.